y'all, my name is Felicia from the blog FeliciaGraves.com, and today we are talking about canning tomatoes for beginners. So this is if you have never canned tomatoes before, we are going to go over what that would look like. So I'm going to be canning a really simple tomato sauce using a water bath canner. So I chose water bath canning because I feel like it's really simple and it's really accessible, and you don't have to go out and buy a whole lot of equipment if you don't already have it. For example, if you have a really big stock pot, you can already use that for your canning. You would just need a little canning rack like this to put in the bottom. This is just a little silicone rack. Super affordable. I think I picked mine up at Walmart, but I will link one for you that you can grab off of Amazon. And then this is really handy. I use this a lot, and I've just saved the box and always put everything right back in here because it just makes it easy for me when I'm getting ready to can. I know where absolutely everything is. It's just a little canning set. I believe I got mine off of Amazon, and I will link that for you as well. And then of course you'll just need your mason jars. And I am going to be using the Weston tomato strainer. Now that is a bit of an investment, and I use that because I do a lot more canning. However, it's not necessary. You can use just a regular food mill or a sieve when you get to the step where you need to remove the skins and the seeds of the tomatoes. So let's go ahead and start prepping all of our ingredients. One more thing I wanted to add that you need is this Ball home preserving book. It is amazing. It's basically like the canning Bible. So I will link that for you as well. We're going to be using a recipe that comes straight out of this book. So everything has been tested. You know that it's safe. You can feel confident in your canning. Okay, now let's go and prep all of those ingredients.
I am getting ready to dice up an onion as well as a few cloves of garlic that will be added to my tomato sauce a little bit later on in the cooking process. Once we have used the strainer and we are ready to start cooking the sauce and letting it condense and get thicker, that is when I go ahead and add in my onions and my garlic and my seasoning. So after I have used the strainer to remove the seeds and the skins, and when I am cooking down the sauce, that's when you're going to want to add any seasoning or anything like that. Of course, you don't have to add seasoning. You can just leave the tomatoes as they are. I also, when I am seasoning them, I don't like to get them too overly seasoned. And the reason for that is I want my jars of tomato sauce to be able to be a bit versatile. So I know that with tomatoes, I like oregano and basil, but I don't overdo it on the seasoning just because I'm thinking about how I'm going to be using this in different kinds of dishes. And maybe one of them is going to be a pasta sauce, but another one is going to be turned into a pizza sauce. So that way, at the time of cooking, I have a little more freedom and flexibility on the seasonings that I want to have, and I can change it up a little bit at that time. So that is just how I prefer to make my tomato sauce that I'm canning. Of course, you are welcome to season yours however you prefer. Just keep in mind how you're going to be using those jars of sauce later on down the road. Now, another thing that I wanted to share with you when it comes to your tomatoes is that you want to be canning paste tomatoes. And you can can any kind of tomato, but a paste tomato is really going to give you the best bang for your buck. And that's going to be like your Roma tomato, your San Marzano tomato, an Amish paste tomato. The reason for that is they have a much lower water content than some of your other tomatoes. So you know when you slice into like a regular beefsteak slicer tomato and it has a lot of that juice and the seeds that are right there in the middle of the tomato, a paste tomato does not have that as much. It still has some, but it's much smaller amount. And that will help you when you are cooking down your tomatoes because it won't take quite as long to cook them down. You won't have as much water that needs to evaporate off in order to get your sauce to the thick consistency that we want for a tomato sauce. So make sure that you are looking for paste tomatoes whenever you are wanting to make tomato sauce.
Now that I have all of my onions and garlic chopped up, I'm going to get my seasoning together. Now here I have some of the tomatoes that we're going to be canning today, but these are all tomatoes that I purchased, except for this one. It's from my fridge as well. The other tomatoes are all from my garden, and so it is totally valid, just so you know, to can tomatoes that you have purchased either at the store or at a farmer's market. It doesn't have to be something that you have grown yourself. You are allowed to can and preserve food that you buy at the grocery store or your farmer's market. I do have a lot of tomatoes that I grew myself. I froze them in gallon-sized freezer bags as they came in from the garden. So right now those bags are sitting in my sink, defrosting a little bit before I get going on the next step. Now, I'm just going to start putting my seasoning together. All of these measurements are listed for you on my website as well as in the ball book that has all of these step-by-step directions that you will need. Also, while I have been chopping onions and getting seasoning and all of that, in the dishwasher I have all of my, darn, none of these fit. I have all of my canning jars. So you want to make sure you want to make sure that you sterilize your jars before you use them for canning, and that is just going to help prevent any kind of disease, you know, like not disease necessarily, bacteria from getting into the food that you are canning. So I have all of those in the dishwasher right now, just running through a cycle. That really, really hot water is going to do the trick. You just always want to make sure that you're using nice, clean ingredients. All right, in my little bowl, I have my salt, pepper, oregano, and red pepper flakes. And then we also have the onion and garlic that are going to season that. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to start putting all of my tomatoes into a really big saucepan. Now, when you are canning tomatoes, it is important that you always remove the skin on the tomato. Tomato canning recipes, almost all of them, I only know of one recipe that leaves the skins on, and it is like specifically from cherry tomatoes. But you want to make sure you're taking the skins off, because that is the way that these recipes were formulated. The skins will affect the pH, so this is super, super important. One way that you can do this is by freezing your tomatoes, and let me show you how that works. So here's one of the bags of frozen tomatoes that I have, and as these tomatoes defrost, I guess they're not quite defrosted enough now, but that skin will just peel right off super, super easily. And so you can make sure and get the skins off that way. You can also see that I already cored this. So if you're freezing them, if you just want to go ahead and core them, then as they defrost, when you're ready to use them, you can peel the skins off. That will help you a lot when it comes to making your sauce. Now, that's not a requirement. You don't have to freeze them beforehand. What you can do, and what I'm doing for most of mine, is you can just put them in as they are into the stock pot with the skins and the seeds, and then I'm going to use an electric like tomato pureer or strainer, but you can use a regular food mill, a regular strainer to get all of the seeds and the skins off. It might take a little bit longer, and it's definitely going to be a lot more like manual labor, but you can absolutely do that. You don't have to invest in the fancy electric strainer. They also have manual strainers that are a little bit more cost efficient that you can also look at doing as well. But don't feel like you absolutely have to go out and buy this crazy fancy equipment. You don't. All right, so I have a large stock pot here, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and just start putting in my frozen tomatoes first because they need to defrost. And these are going to cook down quite a bit. So right now, it's just gonna be, okay, this one's already open. Just a process of putting in tomatoes bit by bit. You can also use more than one stock pot, which is also something I'm going to do, just in this initial part of getting the tomatoes cooked down. There's totally nothing wrong with that. So I'm gonna get this over some heat and then grab my other stock pot. Once everything has cooked down and you're ready to start the straining process, after you strain is when you're going to go back and add in your onions and your seasoning. So you don't have to worry about the seasoning not being balanced all through your sauce recipe.
I want to point out that these tomatoes are going to cook down quite a lot. You can see right now that I can't even fit all of the tomatoes into my 2 sauce pots, but by the end of this, all of the tomato sauce that I am going to can all fits in the larger sauce pot all by itself. So it cooks down quite a bit, and that is something to keep in mind.
Now, as these are cooking down, I will slowly start adding some of these store-bought tomatoes, as well as I have other tomatoes from my garden that did not make it into the freezer yet that I just harvested a couple of days ago. And I will just start probably cutting those in half, or these larger ones into quarters, and popping them in as well. So this will cook down quite a bit. So it's just a process. It's going to take a little bit of time depending on how many tomatoes you have. So just be patient, stir it. Occasionally, you want to make sure that nothing is burning on the bottom, and we will meet back after everything has cooked down.
All of the tomatoes that I am canning today ended up producing 13 pint-sized jars of tomato sauce. So however many tomatoes you are going to need will depend upon how many jars of sauce that you are looking to can. So if I was looking to can a full year's worth of tomato sauce, then I would need quite a lot more tomatoes than I have here that I'm showing you. Of course, that also depends on how much tomato sauce your family goes through in a year. So this is very variable to each individual family, what your wants and needs are when it comes to canning. Or maybe you just have some extra tomatoes that you got on a really good deal, but you want to preserve them. I mean, that is completely valid as well. I do want to share from the Bell canning book. They say that for a thin sauce, you'll need an average of 35 pounds of tomatoes to produce 7 quart jars of sauce. And for a thicker sauce, you need an average of 46 pounds of tomatoes to yield 7 quart jars. So keep that in mind whenever you are deciding how many tomatoes you need in order to achieve your canning goals. Another thing to note is that throughout this process, I am constantly coming over and stirring up the pot. That is both during this process and later on when I am reducing the sauce down to be a thicker sauce. The reason for that is it will start to burn on the bottom a lot faster than you may realize. So you want to keep stirring every couple of minutes just to ensure that your tomatoes or your tomato sauce is not burning on the bottom of the pan.
My tomatoes have cooked down quite a bit, so I'm going to go ahead and use my strainer.
There are several reasons why you need to remove the skins and the seeds, but the most important reason comes down to safety. These recipes for canning tomatoes are formulated around very specific pH levels, and if you were to leave the skins on, it would alter that pH level and therefore alter the safety of the product that you are trying to can and make it not as shelf stable.
Now, as this bowl right here fills up, and I think I got it a little too full, I hope I don't make a mess, I'm just going to transfer it back into this really giant bowl where I put my cut up tomatoes to begin with. I was originally just going to try to use the giant bowl, but it just does not fit under here really well. My only option was to kind of lift everything up, and I didn't feel great about that. But I'm just going to start transferring that into there, and then once my stock pot is empty, I'll be able to transfer the juice and sauce back into the stock pot. Now you can see coming out through here, this is all of those seeds and skins that it is separating out. And so I just have a little bowl there that's going to catch everything. And it is still a bit of a messy process. Part of that is probably definitely on me, but it is a little messy even still, but I really like using this machine, so we're going to keep going.
While you do have to remove those skins and the seeds, you do not have to use an electric strainer like the one I am using. You can use a food mill, or you can also use a colander, and you can put everything in the colander and press the juice and the sauce through that strainer, that colander, and then you would have the seeds and the skins left that you could then remove and separate out. So you do not have to invest in an electric strainer, but you do have to remove those seeds and skins. Now, once I have all of that processed through my strainer, I put it back in the pots on the stove, and I'm just letting it kind of boil and simmer down. I'm keeping a close eye on it, making sure that I'm stirring it, and letting that sauce reduce until it gets to the thickness that I want before I move on to the canning process, which is next.
Okay, let's fill up some of these jars. Now, what I like to do is I make sure that I have everything that I need already set out and good to go. So back here you can see some jars that I have already canned, and they are sitting on a couple of kitchen towels that I have folded up here, because you never ever want to put a hot jar onto your cold countertop, because that can cause your jars to crack, and that would be horrible. So that's also why I have this little pad here. So while I'm filling up my jar, the sauce is still hot. It just gives a little more protection so that it's not sitting on something cold. Now, as I'm filling up my jar, the very first thing I'm going to do is put in 1 tablespoon of lemon juice. And this does have to be lemon juice from the grocery store. You cannot use fresh lemon juice. And the reason for that is how the recipes are made, and it's very specific with the acidity levels. So I'm going to just use my little funnel here and fill my jar up. Now I'm wanting to fill this up because it's a pint jar. I want to have a 1/2 inch headspace. And so that means I want 1/2 inch from the sauce level to where the top of the jar is. And I will show you how I do that is by using this. Now this comes in that little box of canning tools I showed you, and right here along the edge, it's really hard to see. It's even hard to see if you're in person, but there are measurements. So this right here is my 1/2 inch. So I'm just going to put the 1/2 inch on the jar, and I can see that I still need to add some more. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And my best advice here is to just go slow and take your time, because you don't want to be making a lot of giant messes if you can help it, and it's just easier to take your time and go slow. Now I will flip this upside down, use the other part, and I'm just going to run this all along the side of my jar in kind of a little up and down motion, just wanting to work out any air bubbles that might be in there. And then this little rag I have on my surface here is a little bit damp, so it just makes it easy to wipe it off. I just double check that I'm still at a 1/2 inch, and I am. So next I have a little bowl that just has some white vinegar in it and some paper towel. So I'm just going to get this a little bit damp with the vinegar, and then I will take this and run it around the rim of the jar. And this is just because you want to make sure this rim of your jar is very, very clean, and there's not any kind of tiny little debris on there, so that you get a proper seal. Then you put your lid on, and then your canning ring, and I'm just going to tighten this only to fingertip tightness. So that means you don't want to sit there and get it really, really tight. You just want it just to fingertip tightness. And then I will use this little contraption here, and I'm going to put the jar into my water bath canner. Now, this that I'm using for my water bath canner is just a stock pot. It was actually the one I was using earlier, and that popping is just some of my other jars sealing. And it just has water in there. It's really, really hot water right now. And at the bottom is that little canning spacer thing, the black flower looking thing that I showed you before. And that's because you want to have a little bit of space between the bottom of your pot and your jars. So now I'm going to continue working on my other jars. I can fit 4 pint jars at a time in this canner. So I'm just going to keep working on those.
It is very important that the sauce that you are putting into the jars is heated up. And that is because the processing times for these recipes are based on having hot sauce that is in a hot or warm jar. So if your sauce is cold or just tepid, then the processing time is not going to be sufficient to vent the excess headspace gases and to destroy any of those microorganisms that we need to destroy in order to make this sauce shelf stable. So make sure that when you're filling up your jars that you are keeping that sauce hot. Another thing is to just really, I said this before, but slow down and take your time. Pack 1 jar at a time. Don't try to do a big assembly line. Just focus on doing 1 jar at a time. Yes, it may take a little bit longer, but it is so important to have a good quality and to just make sure that everything is done in the proper steps and you don't have anything to worry about as far as introducing any kind of yuck into your jars, and just ensuring that they are indeed going to be safe and shelf stable for you and your family to consume. I also wanted to say again that you do have to use lemon juice that you get from the store. That is really important. It is all about the pH, and when you're adding that acid, it helps to prevent the growth of botulism. So you want to use bottled lemon juice, or you can also get ball citric acid that is made for canning. That is another option, but you do not want to use fresh lemon juice. Now we are doing a water bath canning method, but you can also pressure can tomatoes if that is something that you prefer to do. Both methods work for tomatoes. They can be either water bath or pressure canned. However, you just want to make sure that you are following a recipe for water bath canning if that's what the method you're using, or if you prefer to do pressure canning, make sure you're following a pressure canning recipe. So you just want to be clear on that. Another thing to note is that your canned tomatoes are said to last from 12 to 18 months when stored in a cool, dark place. As long as the seal is intact, they will be okay to use. After that 18-month period, they're still going to be okay to consume. It's just that the nutritional content, like the nutritional value, will start to decrease around that 12 to 18-month time. If you are worried that your canned tomatoes may have gone bad, what you're wanting to look for is you want to see if you have a bulging lid, if anything is leaking, if there is a strange smell, or if the liquid is spurting all over the place when the jar is opened. Obviously, of course, you want to look for mold. That one's probably pretty clear. If you see any of those things, then of course you do not want to consume the food inside of that jar. You want to go ahead and discard that one.
Okay, so I'm going to wait for my pot to come up to a boil. Once it is boiling, then I will set my timer for 35 minutes, and I'm going to just let those process for 35 minutes. When the timer goes off, then I will take them out using that same little grabber thing, little tongs, and I will put them onto the towel that I have right over here. Let me show you again. This towel that I have right over here to just hang out, and they're going to be there all night long. It is 7:30 p.m. or so right now, and I'm just gonna let them hang out. They're gonna be there all night and probably most of the morning before I will come back and make sure that they are, all of them, sealed properly.
A properly sealed lid will be concaved in the center, and when you press on it, it will not move up and down or will not make a popping sound. You will also remove the ring from the jar and lift the lid with your fingertips. A properly sealed lid will remain attached to the jar, and an unsealed lid will not stay attached to the jar. If it is not sealed, you can either reprocess it within 24 hours with a new lid, or you can move it to the refrigerator to store it there.
I have all of the jars we canned up together here. There is one last one that is just coming up to a boil in my water bath canner right now. But we are pretty much done with canning up our sauce. And it was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for just hanging out with me while I did this. It was nice having a friend come alongside me in the kitchen while we were here all day long. I so appreciated having you with me. I do not take it for granted that you have taken some time out of your day today to watch this video and spend time with me in my kitchen, and just any time that you hang out with me in my kitchen or my home or out in the garden. It really means so much to me. So thank you so very much. And be sure to check out some of the videos that I'm going to have come up on the screen, just so you can see some other things that I have going on in my home. And I will see you in the next video. Bye, y'all.